I think we might actually be in business. Well, thank you very much for joining tonight. I am Jared, for those who haven't met me before. I previously worked for Ladbrokes as a product manager, and now I'm back in the writing gig again, and I'm loving it. So I thought, what a good time to actually reflect on my time as a product manager in Ladbrokes and see if there's a bit of crossover perhaps between writing and product. And I think there might be. So let's take a bit of a look and see what we can learn today. Hopefully you'll pick up some tips and tricks along the way. So the whole idea that I'm sort of proposing at the moment is that you can be a product documentarian. I should refresh in a minute. There's a what is it, the 7-second swear delay, I think. So I know, right? So the whole idea I was thinking of is that you could both be a documentarian, and if everyone, show of hands who knows what a documentarian is. All right, so a documentarian is someone who is passionate about documentation and helping users be the best they can, among other things as well. It's something that Write the Docs actually treats, like it's what everyone who is a Write the Docs member, unpaid, is sort of identifies as. And it's great because it doesn't sort of, I guess, stereotype anybody. It can be anyone. Anyone can be passionate about documentation and helping people. And that comes in many different forms. So I think there's an opportunity here to be a product documentarian. And the way I put it in here is that you can have a shot at becoming a product documentarian, which is just my invented term for what a writer that decides to stick their toe into their the product pond and gets pulled in by a feature shark, as you can see from my abusive emoji there. So as part of being a product documentarian, you'll be working with teams really early on in the development cycle to decide on what ideas to experiment with and what ones to say no to. And you'll be saying no a lot if you're doing your job well. So that's an interesting thing that I think as technical writers, we're kind of used to doing as well, because time is limited and there's only usually one of us where we're working. So no is something that we are generally okay at doing. The other thing you'll be doing is identifying problems along the road that will shape the thing you're building and make that idea a reality. You'll turn the problem statements that you identify in that scoping phase into user stories devs can use to help you solve the problem. And sometimes that problem is actually making a physical product or software. And then you use the solved experiments that the developers have helped you solve to focus on more problems, but back with more data than you had before. So it's all about, you might have noticed the trend there, it's more about that iterative process. So you start with lots of questions, you end up with less questions until you get to the point where you've got something that someone might actually be able to use. So you may have something that somebody can use, or based on the experiments that you've learned, you might just chuck it out because it might not actually meet a customer need at that point. But that's all part of the journey of being a product documentarian, right? Now, there's plenty of other things that a product documentarian can do, but we're going to need a lot more pizza if I'm going to go through all those. So I think we might leave that for another conversation and go to the next slide. So, right. It sounds interesting, right, when it refreshes. So you might have noticed that all the things I've talked about just then might sound a little bit familiar as a writer. You've got to work with people, you've got to synthesize information for other people, you've got to write documentation, scare quotes, in the form of user stories, and you've got to collaborate across the business. These are all things that technical writers generally are having to do in their day-to-day jobs. The difference is that you may be doing those things, but you're not looking through a product lens when you're doing it, and it's slightly different. And sometimes too, you might be thinking, well, that's great, but how am I going to get out of the technical writing groove that I'm in and start to solve these larger problems outside of being a technical writer? Well, it may seem hard, but you can do it if you can get out of the groove. And if your organization is open to it, there may be a ladder that you can use to climb out of the groove and go deep into the world of docs and to that lovely shark-infested pool that I talked about before, if you so choose. So if you want to, you can. And with little or no product management experience, it's quite possible for a technical writer to become a product person, to take that leap and to actually succeed as being a product manager. You've just got to be willing to give it a go. And sometimes that can be a bit scary. So in that, I want to go through some things that I've learned at my time at Ladbrokes in my journey from writing to product and back again. I thought about using a Lord of the Rings meme here, but I decided not to. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So before we go too much further, there's a common misconception in product management that I think I'd like to clear up now. You might have heard the terms product manager versus product owner being bandied around, and there's mixed thoughts about this. Some people think that a product owner, let's start with the product manager. A product manager is arguably more strategically focused than an owner, some people will tell you. They usually live and breathe data, and they usually have their ear to the ground or the heart of the product that they're actually supporting or developing for or helping guide people through. They're often looking at industry trends and looking for signs of change in the industry that they need to respond to make sure their product doesn't fail in the market. So on the other side of things, an owner, some people describe owners as being more in the weeds when they're actually doing the work. So they'll be working with the development teams to actually scope and build the product and to help the development team unblock with certain features and that sort of thing they're working on through the development sprints. Usually product owners will attend the stand-ups every day so that the team has access to them, and they can actually ask any questions so they can continue with their daily activities. They also might be sort of junior to a product manager, depending on the size of the business. And they will usually grab challenges or problems from the product manager who's thinking up in the 50,000 foot view and take those down to the 20,000 foot view, and in a way that the developers can actually help them implement the stories and unblock the challenges they face. But I tend to think of it in another way, and I've heard somebody on the many product management blogs that I was following describe it like this: a product owner is the role a product manager assumes in the constructs of Agile. So if you think about it, I don't know, I wouldn't really want to be taking direction from another product manager and just doing the monkey work of sprint work and like doing that sort of iterative process. I'd rather have it all. I'd rather control both the vision and the execution. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So in preparing this presentation, I had a look at some numbers on Seek, and I wanted to see how many jobs are identified as product owner, technical writer, product manager, and I thought I'd throw in something else there as well for food for thought. So based on my search on Saturday, there were 24 jobs identified as product owner jobs. There were 27 technical writer jobs at the same time, which is pretty good. This is just for Brisbane only. But in the product manager space, there were 125 jobs listed across a number of different industries and product types. So I don't know about you, but I'd like the 125 number rather than the 27 or 25 number when I'm looking for work. So I think I might just call myself a product manager there. The other interesting thing I saw was there were 350 jobs for BAs or business analysts, which is interesting. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So the way a product manager works in the business depends largely on the size of the organization. But if you aren't owning the roadmap and you aren't owning the vision and strategy, you're going to be doing someone else's job, dirty work. So bear that in mind when you're trying to work out if this is ownership or management that you're looking for. So on to the things I've learned while I was working at Ladbrokes, and there's a lot of things, but I boil it down to three. and that is, first one is guiding and not leading. So as a product manager, you really need to, let me just scroll up in my notes here. So one thing as a technical writer you might have actually experienced, depending on the team sizes, you might have actually had an opportunity to be a team leader or actually have a managerial role in technical writing. Or if the organization size is small enough, you might have actually been leading yourself as a sole contributor to the team. But when you move into product, you have to balance the concept of leading versus guiding with care. Guiding, some of the things that some examples that I'd sort of suggest for guiding versus leading would be, you might find yourself guiding a business through questions they have about your product vision, guiding your development team through the story development process to ensure that they make the right features. But sometimes you'll need to actually lead as well. So you need to lead with your vision and strategy statements that you can confidently and passionately convey to any level of the business. And you also need to lead by example when the going gets tough and things break, and you need to muck in with your team and make sure that the product gets out the door. And hopefully you don't lead your dev team down the garden path with bad decisions. So when it comes to guiding your team through feature development, you can very easily slip back into habits of writing. And I know I did when I was early in my time at Ladbrokes. I think a lot of the time you try and own everything as a technical writer, particularly if you're a sole contributor. You feel like you need to own the tooling and own the words and own all the processes and everything like that. But the thing with product management is a team sport, and you really need to use the strengths of your team when you're working on a product team to get the best outcomes. So, for smaller features and smaller things that you need to get fixed, it's probably fine to take the lead. But if you've got a big, nasty product that you need to develop, you're going to need to go outside your pool. You're going to need to think about other people that can help you. The good thing about most businesses is they tend to hire smart people. So you're generally in good standing if you ask around and you know the right people to ask. So I remember this one time at Ladbrokes, no flute, I was assigned the responsibility of developing a back-end system that was supposed to match up vendor matches with Ladbrokes data. I'll have to kind of sanitize what it was probably, but the idea was we had vendor data coming in and the Ladbrokes data wasn't clean enough. So we had to have a way of mapping the two data types together so that we could display that correctly in the client front end. And up until that point, we were operating in a model where the way we were developing is, as product managers, we were dictating the stories to the developers, and we were very much sort of pushing them down onto the developers. There was a lot of closing the door for 2 days, writing the user stories, and then, hey, look what we did. Here's what you're going to implement. But we were finding that it wasn't scaling right, and we were finding that the developers were getting frustrated because they didn't have a say in how the product was being built. So for this particular approach, I actually have to give credit to the Scrum Master that was actually working there at the time. He got all the developers and me in the room, and he said, right, let's talk openly about how we might build this thing. What problem are we trying to solve? We're trying to map data. How are we going to do that? So rather than trying to make, wireframe mock-ups and do all that sort of stuff you would normally do, we just whiteboarded stuff. And the result was, cutting a long story short, is that we delivered this mapping interface on time, on budget, and to quite a large degree of satisfaction of the bookmaking team who had to use it. So that was a good example and proof to me that I was doing it wrong, and I'd learned something by doing that wrong and actually then listening and learning and doing it right. So I'm glad that my Scrum Master said, no, mate, stop doing it like that. That's dumb. And that's one of the things as a product manager as well. You've got to keep an open mind and be very, very thick skin to criticism as well. And, technical writers do have that ability as well, but some more than others, So the next one I want to touch on is vision versus execution. So one of the hardest jobs as being a product manager is setting your product's vision. In fact, it's probably the biggest challenge I faced when I was at Ladbrokes and switching from writing to product. those of you who know me, particularly my boss Lucas, when I joined, would understand that I'm not really big on the planning. Or certainly when I joined the company, Credit Sense, I wasn't really big on planning at all. So that strategic vision, you're not just writing about a product anymore that's mature and it's got its customer base defined. You've actually got to go, right, what are we going to build here? It's like starting with a clean slate often, unless the product's mature and you're iterating on it. So sometimes I had a lot of trouble with wanting to focus less on the vision and do more of the doing, because building stuff's fun, right? It's tangible. The planning stuff feels like nothing work in a way, but it's so important. If you get it wrong, your product can fail. And it's not just documentation not hitting the mark, it's the product doesn't make any money and your business folds. So slightly higher stakes. But, the execution part is the fun bit as well, because that's where you get to get a team of really smart people, often smarter than yourself, into a room that can actually make the thing that you're setting in your vision a reality. And the toughest thing is balancing the backlog of visionary things, or the airy-fairy visionary things, with the actual execution bits. And I ran into trouble when I was in the weeds on this really difficult project at Ladbrokes. And, there were some problems with staffing in it, and we had some challenges there to resolve. And I just wasn't getting enough time to surface and just step back from the execution side and just plan some backlog items, because that's the biggest problem as a product manager. You run out of backlog items real quick. The sprints of 2 to 3 weeks end like that. And then you're back to square one again, and you've got no story. So you got to scramble and think about things you can put into the sprint. It's can be really challenging. But the other thing that you'll run into as well, versus the whole vision and execution thing, particularly on vision, is that you might have seen very popular medium articles saying, product manager is the CEO of the product. It's a load of crap. You can't be a CEO of anything if you're not top of the food chain. You can only hope to guide it in a way. So you'll never be a CEO. You'll be a 2IC, maybe 3IC in the process. And you can have a go at defining vision within the constructs of what the actual CEO wants. And in a good, mature organization, you'll have that vision defined from the very top all the way down to you as a product manager. In some immature organizations, you won't know, because they don't even have a way of communicating vision correctly in the business. So it can be really frustrating and really hard to get those requirements out of people. If you do define your vision, you need to be prepared to justify it very strongly when a certain person with the title of Hippo comes into the room, which is the highest paid person in the org. They come in and they go, I don't like the vision. So then you have to throw it out and you have to start again. Or do a lot of fast thinking on your feet to spin it in a way that they go, oh, well, that's a great idea because I think that's my idea and that's great. So, yeah, it has its challenges. The next one that is probably a pretty good lesson that I learned is the whole concept of data versus opinion. So one thing you'll hear a lot in your job as a product manager is opinion about things. I think if we did this, we'd make $1 million. If we don't do this feature, we believe in lettuces all over the ground, $100 bills, lettuces. No, we can't do this feature because legal said we couldn't last year. Can't do it. Now, all these statements on their face value sound strong. And in the case of the legal thing, you go, whoa, it's legal said no, we can't do that. Like, well, I'm not going to rock the boat there. And it's really easy, I'm speaking from experience here, as a new product manager, to take things at face value too much and not keep asking those why questions. You need to channel your inner toddler, your inner 3-year-old, and you need to keep digging away until your brain is satisfied that you know the actual reason why someone is telling you something. Data trumps opinions every time. And as the monkey on the board there, that's the problem. Any monkey can have an opinion. But unless you back it with data, particularly opinionated hippos in the business as well are quite good at this, you're going to have a battle on your hands unless you debunk their opinions with data or hard facts. So another saying that's one of my favorites, and I forget who actually said this, but if you have data, let's go with the data. If all you have is opinions, let's go with mine. So continue on from the whole data piece, I wanted to bring up this slide. And this particular slide is a conversation that I had at Ladbrokes about iOS 8 and our users of iOS 8. Now, I was told that if we got rid of iOS 8, hundreds of VIPs would be affected. Like, we'd lose thousands of users if we lost iOS 8 support. And this was around iOS 10 and 11. This wasn't like iOS 9. And, this was at the point in time when there was a very opinionated hippo running the show at Ladbrokes. And it was impossible to get any traction with this sort of thing. You just had to go, well, okay, we can't do it. But then things changed. Management structure changed at Ladbrokes. And we found that, we had to reconsider this again because of the dreaded notch in iOS. And the way not the Android app, the iOS app in Ladbrokes worked was there was a lot of top-loaded title bars in all the iOS view controllers. So that meant that the notch threw everything down and all the flow just went to chaos, went to cack. It was horrible. So we had to put this back on the table again. So we went, okay, well, if we don't get rid of iOS 8, we can't consume the new API for iOS 9 and onwards, which means we're limited, which means we can't support the notch, which means we can't do a whole lot of things. So we went, we've got to look at these numbers again. So this time, instead of taking it at face value, I went to another department in the business, and that's the data warehouse team. Now, depending on the size of your business, you might have a data warehouse team, and they are your friends as a product manager because they have access to the database or the data warehouse database, and they can pull all manner of cool data out of the system. And it turns out that based on our device subscriptions, and these numbers are rounded for confidentiality reasons, but we weren't talking about thousands. We're talking about hundreds of VIPs, and actually less than 1% of users would be affected, which amounted to, let's call it 500 users. And while iOS was indeed number one, which was another question we had in the business, like what platform is number one? Yes, it's a very popular platform because iOS gambling apps are allowed in the App Store, whereas Android, they're not. iOS 8 was last in the list. So those facts and data allowed us to go, right, new hippo, we have this information that we'd like to put forward and tell you that if we don't do this, we're not going to have an iOS app that functions correctly in the App Store. So what do you think about prioritizing this higher? Go ahead and do that, product team. So that was good. And the iOS team rejoiced because they were getting sick and tired of having to maintain iOS 8 to 10 at that point. So another key point that we need to think about as product managers, we have to focus on solving customer problems. Similar to what we have to do in technical writing, the customer is king in technical writing as well. But as I touched on before, if you don't solve customer problems properly as a product manager, your product fails and you quickly find yourself out of a job. So the best thing you can do as a PM is ensure you always think about the problem you're trying to solve for the person using your software. So in writing, we're pretty good at thinking about the customer when writing a solution article or deep dive or an API reference for a developer. We know our audience and we know the customer that we're trying to target there, but it's really important to never lose sight of the customer needs all the way through the product journey. So in writing, you need to think of the job your document is going to do for the reader. For example, answer a question if it's a FAQ, or solve a configuration hurdle if it's a getting started guide. And in product, you need to think similarly. What would a customer choose my software or product to do a specific job over my competitors? It's the same sort of story. Getting your problem statements right and the jobs to be done your product is solving for customers is crucial to your product vision and execution, and it'll help you resolve some of those tricky data versus opinion questions as well. It's all about collecting data from different sources. And really, the customer is king. That's the most important thing you're going to be doing as a product manager, looking at the customer problems and solving them. So let's recap. So far, we know it's better to guide your team rather than lead your team in most cases, although sometimes you need to step up and lead when the going gets tough. You need to define a clear vision for your product, because if you don't, none of your team is going to know what to build, and they're not going to be able to feel connected to the product they're building, which is a really big challenge as well for developers. And the other thing is you've got to always be solving those customer problems, because the customer is king. So that's great and all, but you might be wondering how you might get your own delicious toe into the pool for a feature shark to snack on here. And it boils down to a few things. Thing number one, and this is my personal opinion, your results may vary, but passion is key. And passion in product management or product ownership comes in two flavors. It's either a passion for the product or a passion for the craft of product management. So if you're in a job writing about products you don't really care about, chances are you'll feel the same way about being the point person for the same product if you're in the product manager role. So you've also got to ask yourself some tough questions. If things got tough, would I care enough to go the extra mile, stay back, help the team get the product out the door? And why would I do this? Apart from the obvious reasons of losing your job if you didn't, you got to think about the reason why you are passionate about the product, because you don't have the passion, it's going to really sap the energy out of you. So I've read some articles on Medium, which I'll get to later, about the sources you can use to learn about this, from Silicon Valley PMs, because of course Silicon Valley is full of startups, full of product management gigs. Like the amount of churn in that space is incredible. And experienced ones, we're talking about in some cases 10 years or more, sometimes less if they're really switched on, they can separate the idea of the product with the discipline of product management. So they can nerd out on the flow that they get from actually releasing a really cool product, not so much the technology that they're looking at. So that's two ways you can sort of split it. But starting out in product, you're probably going to be looking more at I want to do this product because it resonates with me in some way, because you don't have the skills built up yet. I'll warn you though that getting to the point of flow takes a lot of mistakes, a lot of learning. And if you're in the wrong place, it drains your passion for things. So the reason why passion is so important is if you start with an empty cup, you're just going to burn out and you're going to feel resentment and you're not going to enjoy product management. And that'd be a real shame, because if you get into the right gig, it's actually a lot of fun. So, okay, if you've got the passion for the product, what do you do next? How, as a technical writer, do you start finding out how you can get into the product gig? Well, if you are in the right company, you like the product that you're documenting, you might think about asking your workmates, because within businesses, depending on the size, there's a whole lot of people in the business that can give you some ideas about product management. And all you have to do is ask. Sometimes you might need to buy them a coffee, but that's a small price to pay. Unless you've got a coffee machine, then the shout's on it. So So you got to see if you can find teams in your org that are already doing product or contributing to the product development process. And yes, as documentarians, we are or should be part of that product development process. But again, it's that product lens that sometimes we don't have. So you might already be going to meetings with these people like business analysts. Hi, Wendy. Product managers, product owners, all these roles are people that you can go to. And because of the people that they are and the job they do, they love to talk and they love to share what their passion is for what they're doing. So ask them what they do. You can even pitch it to your boss that if you want to go and catch up with these people in meetings, that it's free training for you as well. Why not? And, you know, as a technical writer, what was that? And, you know, you can, where was I? Dane, wrecked. That's my fault.
It's disruption in the force, you know that.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. You know, the point I was going to make is that, you know, interview skills are a great thing to have as a product manager or a technical writer. And these information sessions you can use to practice your interviewing skills. So it's not a bad thing. Go to lunch with the people and, you know, pick their brains. Ask them questions about what they like about their job, what they don't. You know, what drains them and what energizes in their job in your particular business, because it varies business to business as well. You can get a pretty good barometer from these chats that you have, whether they're formal or informal, about the company you're working in and the product environment in the company. And, you know, if it's mostly, hopefully it's not mostly negative, but if it is, it might not be the right place to start your product journey. So sometimes it happens. So after you've picked the brains of all your colleagues, you can go and do what we all love to do most of the time, and that is read the internet. So, you know, there is so much information out there about product management. You could not read it all in your lifetime. There are podcasts, Medium posts, mailing lists that you subscribe that just dump data and emails into your inbox. I think at one point I'd subscribed to something like 10 different product management emails, and I just had to declare like email bankruptcy and just delete them all, because I had like, I think 2 months in arrears of email messages that I hadn't got through. So there's heaps of really good information out there. And, you know, the way that I really got a lot of tips and tricks was listening to podcasts on the way in. There's heaps of really good ones, actually. There's one called 100 PM, and these are available in any, like your Apple podcatcher or Pocket Cast on Android or any podcatching service. So 100 PM is a great one. The other one is This is Product Management, which focuses on a different thing about product management each episode from a whole range of different industries and people. It's really great. The other one, which I found really useful, and you might have heard me mention it before, was Jobs to be Done. That's a podcast about that discipline of working out what the jobs to be done are. And it's a really interesting way of thinking about things. The other one's a really good one, is the Agile Uprising podcast. You get a bit of both from that, a bit of information about Agile as well as product as well. As far as Medium goes, medium.com is a huge resource for product management. One of the publications on Medium that I follow is one called Hacker Noon. And Hacker Noon has a lot of development stuff, but it's got a lot of business-related product management stuff on there too. And one of my favorite product people that I follow on Twitter is a guy called Twitter is John Cutler. His handle is John Cuttlefish. And there's something about this guy. He's in Silicon Valley, and I swear there were some weeks where it was like he had a hidden camera in Ladbrokes, and he was talking about things that were challenging me at the time in Ladbrokes. I said, dude, what is going on? Have you planted a camera on me? Like, seriously, it was uncanny. So he's a really no-nonsense product manager, and he tells it like it is. It's really good. For email subscriptions, you can subscribe to, there's so many, but the ones that I found were really good digest-style subscriptions were Product Management Daily. And if you haven't already checked it out, check out Product Hunt as well. Product Hunt isn't just for product managers. It's for anyone who likes cool, new, shiny things. And it'll give you a summary of the really cool things that are being released today or in the week. And you might find some really cool things that aren't just product related, but also useful for technical writing as well. So it's a good one to follow. Another subscription which is really good is Prioritize by Mind the Product. And Mind the Product also have a really, really good YouTube channel. They put all their very expensive conference presentations that you have to pay thousands of dollars for up on their YouTube channel for you to just like gorge on. So that's great. The other thing that you'll need to be pretty good at with product management is negotiation. And there's a really, really good website called the Black Swan Group that the people on that website have written a book called Never Split the Difference for negotiations. They're actually hostage negotiators. And they've got some really good negotiation tips. And you need to do that really well as a product manager. So that's good. And probably the last one would be Radical Candor, which is basically a way of communicating and telling people tricky things in the most effective way possible, and not so much the politest way, but the most direct and effective way possible. So that's a really good one as well. The other thing that's really good, as well as, of course, the classic meetup, just like we are now at the moment. And there's probably 3 product meetups in Brisbane at the moment that you can go to. One of them is Product Talks Brisbane. The other one's Product Tank Brisbane, one word. And Brisbane Customer Experience and Design Thinking meetup as well. Now, customer experience and design is one of the cornerstones of product management as well. And you'll meet some very smart people if you go to these product things. And everyone loves to have a chat. I've never been to one of these ones where I felt awkward, even in my early product management career. It's really worth checking out. So after you've done all those free things, you could think about opening up your wallet and spending some money. And if you want to do that, you can go on some training. One of the things you might want to consider doing is getting your certified Scrum product owner qualification. And one of the ways you can do that is online. But the person that I found really, really useful to go through is a guy called Jeff Patton. And he runs a course called Passionate Product Ownership. So at the end of that course, you'll get your certified Scrum product owner certificate, but you'll also learn a whole lot of stuff about how to actually do that sort of business analysis side of things as well as work out what to build and what not to build. He's an amazing sketch noter. He'll actually live draw most of the notes he does in the session. It's kind of really amazing to go along. And the other one, I've jumped through too many, I think. No, it's all right. I thought I did. But
almost the quarter 2.
Oh no, I'm nearly done. So the other thing you can do is you can volunteer. And you might think, I'm new to product management. Why would I volunteer? Well, the thing is that at a lot of startups and hackathons, the people who go to these hackathons, they might be developers and they might be really good at that, but they might not be able to turn their development skills into what problem it solves for the customer. So you can come along, participate in a hackathon, get some experience actually making something small and quick with a really short end goal at the end. But you can also build some connections as well with people. And there's a few places you can do that. River City Labs is a big one here in Brisbane for that. It's such a supportive community for hackathons. And, there's nothing stopping you going and trying to help out your favorite open source projects as well on GitHub. You don't need to be in the office to do product management. You can be remote if you want, as long as everything is set up in a way that you can work that way. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. I started doing some technical writing for HubPress, which is a static site blog framework. And I turned out, like when I was doing the product management stuff, I actually started helping them out do a bit of product road mapping as well, as part of doing the writing as well. So, there's lots of opportunities to do, to try your skills and test things out. So the fact is that as product people, you can, as technical writers, you can actually be product people. All you have to do is put yourself out there and give it a go. So that's the end.